Hi, everyone. I'm James Garbutt.
And I'm Denny Dumas.
And this is the Garbutt Dumas Real Estate Podcast.
New construction in 2021. The scene has changed. Pre-sales are different. We talked we did a podcast last year, or probably early in the year, and I've done a bunch of social media videos about new construction, opportunity in new construction, and 2019 and 2020 were slow points for pre-sales. And we saw a lot of developers trying to get rid of products, so offering pretty good incentives. I saw up to like 3 or 4% off, which is something I've never seen before in my career. I saw developers lowering deposits. So typically for a pre-sale that's 3 years out, the deposit structure is going to be 20, 25% in some cases. I saw some developers offering 10 or even 5% deposits for projects 3 years out. And they were offering much bigger real estate commissions to just entice people to bring buyers into their projects. That has all changed.
It's all at the door now.
2021 is a different apple, but there's still a lot of opportunity, I think, in new construction. And we'll kind of get into some specific examples that we've dealt with in the last, even just in the last few weeks. In the last 3 days, we have 3 clients writing on new construction. So a lot of like up-to-date experience with different projects in different neighborhoods throughout Greater Vancouver. I still see a lot of opportunity. And maybe I'll share a couple things that I like about new construction right now. One is you're not competing. So a lot of product right now, seriously.
You get to buy the place.
If you write a contract, the developer's likely going to say yes. If you write his number or their number, yeah. You're not competing. So in a lot of scenarios right now, especially well-priced condos, townhouses, and single-family homes, there are multiple offers. There are 3, 4, 5, 10, 20 groups that want to buy that property, and you are guessing what the price is going to be. You're just guessing. You're writing subject free. You're putting a deposit attached. You're putting yourself out there a little bit, and you are, fingers crossed, hopefully getting something. With new construction, you're walking in the door. You're told what the advertised price is, and if you offer that price, they're likely going to accept it. They may make some changes, and I've got a story from a couple days ago that they did make some changes, but you still have the opportunity versus in multiple offers, you may not even get a call back. Number 2 is you have a 7-day rescission period. So a lot of resale right now is selling subject free, which means you're doing due diligence as quickly as you can in a couple days. You're checking with the city for permits. You are getting your deposit ready. You are reading through strata documents if you're buying strata, condo, townhouse, and you're writing subject-free offers. If that offer is signed by the seller, it is a firm binding contract. You bought that place. With new construction, you automatically have a 7-day rescission period, which is essentially a 7-day subject removal. Gives you a little bit of time to breathe, gives you some time to make sure you're making the right decision, get your finances in order, all that stuff. I think why new construction is still slightly slower than resale is because there's a lot of, I don't know if anxiety is the right word right now in resale. People are a little bit desperate to buy something and move. I think they've been cooped up in their houses for the last 12 months and they really want yard space and extra bedrooms that they don't want to wait a year or 2 years like new construction often is. They want to move in 2 months.
Yeah, I think you nailed it there. I think new construction, yes, half is end users and half is speculators and investors. And it's the speculators and investors that basically kind of went away. And the end users want a place after in the pandemic. Yeah. Like, I want to move to Port Moody now. I don't want to wait 2 years to get there. Yeah. So, you nailed it. It's just not, there was heavy speculation a few years ago. And there'd be lineups around the corner, and you're lucky if you can even buy a place and say Bosa's, what was the Pier Park, Pier West?
Yeah, Pier West.
You're lucky if you can get a place for $1,100 a foot down in Bosa's Pier West. Yeah. But no, I think overall it's just a better buying environment in this hot market. You have 7-day rescission, time to think. Mm-hmm. And when you touched on the deposit structure, that's a huge lure for anyone that's kind of has their investor hat on. If you can get away with a 5-10% down deposit and you don't have to pay a mortgage for 2 years, and if that property goes up 10%, your deposit's 10%, you have 100% return on your investment after 2 years without paying a mortgage. So it's from like a return on investment angle, it makes sense. But you are speculating. You are speculating.
Totally. I want to share a couple examples recently. So I won't name the complex. We wrote an offer on new construction, townhouse, wrote the offer with the number that the developer had advertised. This is how much new construction is changing quickly. And developers are savvy investors often, and they understand that the market is changing and resale is climbing. And their price that they were advertised at in December, January is basically in line with resale or below resale now. And that's happened a couple times. There was one complex in Pitt Meadows where that actually happened, and literally weekly, the developer was increasing prices. But this specific one, we wrote an offer at their number, send it in. We get a phone call the next morning from the sales rep, and she says, got good news and some bad news. The developer wants to work with this offer, but he understands that the market is improving and there are only 2 units left in the complex, and he has 2 extra parking stalls that no one has purchased. So what he's going to do is counter you with a second parking stall at an extra $25,000. I say, well, that's great. My clients don't want a second parking stall, so you're going to have to do better than the advertised price because this is just a burden for us. And anyway, we go back and forth a bunch. And a second parking stall in this location, in this complex, adds a lot of value. It's difficult to put an exact number on it for resale-wise, and these clients are investors, so the extra parking stall is not necessary for them in terms of renting out the unit. But we agreed on $20,000, but that would have never happened last fall. Last fall, a developer would have been so pumped to see an offer, to see one of their units sell, that they would just sign it and get the heck out of there, right? But this is a little bit of the leverage that you have in a seller's market, being a developer. Basically, his response to us was, we will honor the deal. You have to take the second parking at a cost of $25,000, which we got down to $20,000, or we're going to relist next week and re-advertise it at a $50,000 higher. So up to you. You can buy it right now for an extra $20,000 or next week for an extra $50,000. I've never seen that before. Like, usually new construction, how it works is there's an advertised price. The salesperson tells you what the price is. You say, yeah, I'm okay with that. And you write the offer. In slow markets, you can negotiate a little bit potentially. In busy markets, you're basically writing their number, or they say, see you later, someone else is going to buy it. But I've never had them come back at a higher number.
Sounds like if you're there 1 week earlier, it might have been a different story.
Totally. Yeah. But that same day, someone else wrote on the other unit. Yeah. There was only 2 units left in this specific complex. So the developer knew that he had all the leverage. And it's not a great reputation move long-term for people like this, that, maybe smaller developers, they're more concerned about short-term wins than long-term reputation. And does the extra $20,000 mean much to them in terms of return on investment for the project? No, it's very, very small. But it leaves a sour taste in the purchaser's mouth, in my, just with my experience with them, in that that's the way that they want to do business.
There's a whole strategy between project marketing when they have a zoo of a project and they're trying to maximize prices on that one sales day, and the prices are more expensive in the afternoon than they are in the morning. What was it, 258 on 6th Street here in New West? They had a gong show of a sales day when they first launched. And I remember all the prices were changing throughout the day. Anyway, I think you touched on a good thing in the value of new construction versus resale, because there is a difference there, and that difference does swing. And there's moments where there's a lot of speculation and investors out looking for opportunity, and there's moments where it just dries up. And say 2020, it dried up, but not long before that, say 2018, 2016, or 2017, it was very active. Crazy. And so the premium for new construction when things were active, I remember you'd be paying 20% or more above resale comparables. So you buy a pre-sale because you're speculating, you don't have to pay a mortgage for 2-3 years. But the cost of when you compare what you're buying apples to apples to what exists in the resale market, it was say 20% higher, or in some cases even more. But in 2020, when the market for new construction softened, they got closer to resale values. And you're bringing up an example here that is basically at resale value. I'd say, it's case by case, but on average, I would expect new developments to be about 5 to 10% above resale comparables. And when they are in line with resale comparables, I think that's a great opportunity. And it sounds like you have that case right now.
There's a project right across the street that is a little, let's say a little more luxury, a little higher end finishes, but still on a busy street. And their 3-bedroom townhouses are selling. They're probably half sold out, that project, for $1.2 million. And this one across the street for 2 and den, but the den is big. It's 8 by 8 or 9 by 8. It just doesn't have a window. $885. Like it seems like almost too good to be true, which is why I brought like an investor client in there and I said, this seems like a really good opportunity. Townhouses are going crazy. And then literally on the other side of the street, 2 blocks over, Marcon has a development and they're not releasing the project because they feel that the market's going to go up so much in the next 12 months. They're like, their foundation and framing right now. Yeah. And I called Marcon. I'm like, hey, I want to buy one of your townhomes. And I have a few people that would be very interested. How can we get some more information? When are you releasing them? What are the prices going to be? And they said, honestly, the developers kept it really hush-hush. It sounds like they're just going to wait because the market's so good. So they're not even selling until they're completed. And I honestly think like those 3-bedroom townhomes in this specific neighborhood, they used to be $950. And when they... next spring, they could be 1.25. So, I mean, from an investment standpoint from the developer, if you've got the cash flow and you don't need deposits to fund your project, it's a good move. But as a consumer, someone who would like to buy one, and a realtor who has clients that would love to be in that neighborhood and buy them, it sucks.
I think we should acknowledge the importance of developer reputation when considering new construction. I mean, there's only a select few developers that have a real well-known reputation. I mean, there's a lot of developers in the city, and unfortunately, the small and medium-sized ones just don't have as much attention to get a reputation in a lot of cases. Yeah. And for sometimes, if you're looking at a certain area or a certain neighborhood, you're at the mercy of what developments exist there. You know, and honestly, sometimes these smaller, like East Vancouver style, 6-10 unit developments are real cool places. So I wouldn't be as stuck on developer reputation, but it is an important thing to consider. And I guess the big reason for that is there's been some, unfortunate events in the past and some sketchy things in the past that certain developers have done that just seem unfair to the buyers. And so developer reputation is important right now because when we look at the years ahead, there could be a lot of change. And whenever prices or values change a lot between the time you sign a contract and the time the contract is complete, that's where the risks can be in place more when the prices go up or down significantly. And, I'll give you a few examples. So if you buy today and the prices rapidly increase over the next 6 to 12 months, and the development hasn't broken ground, and the outside date is 3-4 years out, the completion date. There's been I remember some stories in Richmond and Vancouver a few years back where it was more profitable for the developer to sell the land to another developer than start construction and fulfill the contract. And so, your buyer, you have to be in a position, you want to be in a position where you can complete on this project. So you have to keep your finances in check. You need to be able to qualify for a mortgage, years out. And you've placed your bet on this new construction development. You've put your deposit down, which means that you can't buy something else and take advantage of the market elsewhere. So you are on the hook for this place. You feel pretty good about it 6-12 months later because prices have gone up 20%. But the developer feels, I can make more money by selling this land than completing it. And it's a rare thing that happens, but it has happened in the past. And unfortunately, these contracts that you sign with new construction are developer friendly. They're not really in the best interest of buyers. I'd love to see that change. And there's been a few instances in the past where hundreds of buyers have been left with their deposit back. Like basically, they get the deposit returned to them. Maybe they get some interest, but they miss out on all that market gain that they were tied up for. And that's just criminal to me. I mean, we had a specific instance, which I'd say that's the worst case scenario. The worst case scenario is you buy a new construction place, it goes up significantly in value, and the developer does something along the way that gets you out of the contract to recognize more value and profit for themselves. A lightened version of that, and a very public thing here in New West, was a development called Westbourne. Now, this is the second worst case scenario. That's slightly less worse, but at least it still doesn't feel right. So we had some clients buying this development at Westbourne a few years back, and the prices were good. And the market changed a lot for the better. So prices went up a lot, say, after the first year of signing that contract. What the developer did, because the values went up so much and construction costs were high, and I guess they weren't making much profit or anything on this development, is they went back to the buyers and said, hey, if you want to go ahead with your purchase, you have to increase your price 15%. So these buyers committed to a price, they submitted a deposit, and they were told that in order to complete, they have to come up with they have to be willing to pay an additional 15% of the purchase price. Well, that was one of the three options. So one of the three options, you got to up your price 15%. Number two is we'll give your deposit back plus 50%. Number three was we'll keep your deposit and we'll resell your unit and you'll get 40% of the net profits from the difference after costs.
Isn't that crazy?
So, I mean, that's bad, but it's arguably better than just not getting anything. And that's what these, there is an example in Richmond and Vancouver that happened. So I think when I'm talking about developer reputation, I couldn't imagine a BOZA doing that. And if you're buying a development that is 123 Main Street Development Corporation, basically the address of the project, and developer doesn't really have a long-standing track record, if there's a lot of market gain, you have to recognize that you signed a developer-friendly contract. That developer has some ways to get out of it. And if it goes up drastically, you might be in a situation where, in a rare event, that developer releases you from the deal and you couldn't buy something else. And unfortunately, you miss out on that market gain. So reputation matters. Would I focus solely on reputation? Well, these are rare events that I'm talking about. So my answer is no. But I think if you have the option, a comparable option, I might use of two developments and one has better reputational value, I might lean that way. But in a lot of neighborhoods, like for example, waterfront communities, you're kind of at the mercy of the development that's in the neighborhood that you want to live in. And I don't know if I would shy away from, I don't know if I'd shy away over concerns of buying a place and it not completing, because those are rare events, but it does happen.
That reputation comes at a cost too. So understand that a lot of the smaller developers, they're really common in like lower price point areas, Langley, Poco, just developers who maybe are not as experienced. They're putting together smaller projects, 8 to 30 unit townhome complex, low-rise condo buildings. They are almost trying to break into the market and they can't rely on reputation to bring people to their projects. So they are pricing units accordingly. Like a BOZA tower is going to sell at a much different price point than a 123 Main Street that you've never heard of before, who's only done a couple multifamily projects. And so they're enticing you with price points. What other things do you focus on when you're looking at developer? When you're looking at new construction? So one would be reputation. Yes, it matters.
Deposit structure.
Deposit structure for sure. Location of project, right? So like when you're an investor looking at new construction, you obviously are looking for return on investment when the project is built. If you're planning to rent it out for 5 years and then sell, you want it to be able to sell. So you're looking at quality of construction, but location is huge. If quality is mediocre and location is star, like 1A, it's going to override, right? What other things are you looking at?
Well, I have a little bit of pros and cons here, Denny.
I like it.
Should I move into my pros and cons list of, because there's a lot of factors to look at, but let's talk about I'd like to just talk about the pros and cons of new construction. So the pros of new construction is you get a 2-5-10 warranty. Yep. Great warranty program, that's a pro. No mortgage until it completes. So basically you are, for just the cost of a deposit, which in most cases is 15% or less, you are able to tie up a very valuable asset for years. And just in general, real estate prices rise over time. So it's a low cost to secure real estate that is likely to go up in value between the time that you sign the contract and the time it completes. The cons are, you don't know what the market value is going to be by the time it completes, from the time you sign the contract. You don't know what the interest rates are going to be by the time it completes. You don't know your financing situation thoroughly. I mean, you can get pre-approved 2 or 3 years before that condo completes and everything looks great. But if your job changes, if the government changes the stress test, or if lending requirements change, that could affect your financing. And keep in mind, even though you are not out of pocket, you're like, in a lot of cases, you might be, say, out of pocket 10% deposit. You also have to come up with, in a lot of cases, another 10% for that 20% down payment, if that's what you're doing. And you have to qualify for the mortgage when it really matters. So you are taking on financing risk there. Now, this is a pro and a con. I'd say it's a con for people that want to move in, and a pro for investors is the completion date. And so the way that these contracts are written is usually there's the estimated completion date, and then there's the outside date. And I always like to look at that outside date. That outside date to me is if you're going to move into a place, I tend to find that people that are moving into these new construction want it done sooner than later. So you don't want to see a real drawn out outside completion date. But if you're an investor, I don't see any harm in the longer the date. I mean, just on average, prices rise over time. So I'd like that outside date. But also realize these contracts come with a force majeure clause. That means that if there's a disaster or something that happens, they can just keep pushing it back and back and back. So if you're buying a new construction to live in, just recognize that construction delays are common and it can happen. But from an investor point of view, I see that as a positive.
If you're an end user too and planning to move in and you have something to sell, it can be very challenging to line up those dates, because in most contracts, developers are only required to give you 2 weeks notice to complete. So throughout the project, you'll get updates on, okay, well, we're a little bit behind based on these 3 reasons. We're planning the estimated completion now, instead of March 2022, is going to be June 2022. And that'll keep happening through the project as delays come up, as delays with cities and permits and inspections and all that kind of stuff. But if you are planning to sell something, you kind of have to put yourself out there a little bit on the sell side, sell it, potentially Airbnb or stay with family or rent for a couple months, and to wait for your completion, because you typically don't get more notice than 2 weeks.
It's frustrating.
Yeah.
You're right. 2 weeks notice is not enough time. And some developers aren't really flexible on it.
Yeah.
And, the buyers are sitting in this spot where they're seeing their development nearing completion, but really the range of possible completion dates could be in like a 6-month window, and you're trying to plan your life around it, and you're given no notice to do so.
Yeah.
So yeah, it can be frustrating for end users, but as an investor, delays are common, and delays usually mean more market gain before you have to pay a mortgage.
Yeah.
The finished product too. There's a potential negative is, size and layout. Let's call it that. The way that these contracts are written, there's usually an allowance of 3 or 5% leniency on the size of space that you're going to get.
I saw 8 recently.
8%.
I've never seen that before.
So if you buy a 1,000 square foot place and they knock off 80 square feet, you could end up with a 920 in that place and still be forced to pay the same price. So basically the way that what we're talking about is there's a percentage allowance. So if you want to look at that in the contract and realize this kind of is where another example of where developer reputation comes into play, is, reputable developers won't play with those numbers very often, but maybe some less reputable ones might fudge the numbers a little bit. And, what I mean by that is a place that is truly 950 might be advertised at 1,000 to get a little extra profit because they have a little leniency. I don't think that happens often, but in theory, it's something to watch for. Mm-hmm. Is how is it a 3% buffer? Is it a 5%? And this is like leniency on what you're paying for and how big the discrepancy can actually be.
Totally.
Or 8%. And then the finished product. Sometimes, when you're walking into a new development, you're going into the show home. And boy, do they jazz up those show homes. You don't get the wallpaper, you don't get all the built-ins and all the extras. But so I think one thing to really acknowledge is a lot of times when a buyer goes into a show home and then they see the product on the day they get it, it looks very plain in comparison. And it's hard to have the same reaction that you have when you walk into a show home. So just recognize that a lot of show homes have many items included that aren't included when you actually buy the place. And then just in terms of that finished product, the developers do have the right to make changes on materials and appliances as they need to. And this is another reason why reputation comes into play. And lastly, legal consequences. So, you know, you're not happy with the outcome in some way, shape, or form. What do you do? I mean, at the end of the day, and I talked about this Westbourne example in New West, and there's other examples. In most scenarios, buyers don't have the means to fight a developer. Getting into a legal battle is very expensive. It might be a little bit better if you collaborated with all the buyers in the development, but that's hard to arrange, and I don't see that happening. And most oftentimes, it ties up money and resources, and developers have their contract that protects them. So in short, if you do have a genuine issue, there are always exceptions, but for a lot of these events, it's going to cost you $50,000 or a lot in legal expenses, and you're up against a developer with deep pockets. So getting justice in the legal system against the developer is expensive and challenging. So those are the kind of cons that come to mind. I think some tips or some things to maybe consider and look for.
Can I add one?
Yeah, add a con.
You forgot about a big one for new construction. GST.
Oh, GST. Yeah, that's...
So new construction. Yeah. New construction, you pay 5% GST on top of the purchase price. In BC, they announced a couple of years ago, maybe 2017, 2018, for new construction under $750K, you do not pay property transfer tax, which is typically the biggest expense on the buy side of purchasing real estate. But if you are purchasing, let's say, a new townhouse in Port Moody, Coquitlam, that is $1 million, 1.1, those you'll be paying property transfer tax and GST. So your tax bill can be rather large.
Should we add, in addition to GST, disclosure amendments?
Oh, man.
So when you're buying a property, a new construction, you get a real thick booklet of a property disclosure statement for that development, which is really, it's challenging for most people to comprehend. But in some cases, like Concord Brentwood, for example, you might get half a dozen amendments to this disclosure that you already barely understood, and then they amend it, and then you're trying to understand what they amended.
I think for Amazing Brentwood was about a 4.5-year build. There was a lot of delays. It was delayed like a year and a half. And I think it was Tower 3 that I had someone buy in. I think we had 9 amendments.
Yeah.
It seems like every 3 months you're getting a new document that's 45 pages long. You're trying to figure out what they changed.
To truly understand what you're buying and be protected, you need to get a lawyer to independently review them. But even after that, so say you have a lawyer review this development contract. The lawyer's going to say, yes, it protects the developer. Here's your risks. Yeah. Take it or leave it. We're in a market where you have to take it if you want to buy it. So recognize right now, March 2021, as we're doing this is a market where you pay the developer, you sign the developer's contract, you give them what they want. It's not a market where you can really haggle a lot with the developer. And in general, most developers don't like their contracts being altered anyway. So it is always recommended to have a lawyer review the contract, but recognize that that lawyer is not going to say, oh, this is a great contract, you're well protected. It's just going to highlight all the negatives that we're talking about here. So if you want to truly understand the disclosure statement, you need a lawyer. If you want to understand the amendments to it, you need a lawyer. And at the end of the day, all these things, the developer's going to just do what they do anyway. The lawyer's just going to explain to you that you have to just deal with it. You have to accept it. But at least they'll let you know what you're getting into. But I wanted to kind of highlight some tips. And right now we're in a hot market. Mm-hmm. And what might be some tips in a more normal market for buyers buying into new construction. I thought of a few things, So one thing, in a more normal market, say 2020, when you may have some more negotiation power, I tend to find that they're still less likely to allow you to alter their contract. So let's move past that. But let's focus on the negotiation. What are the items to negotiate on? And to me, deposit structure is important. So when the market isn't thriving, ask for less deposit. If they want 15%, they might get away with 10. If they want 10%, they might do 5. So, I like to, when you have some negotiation power, reduce your deposit, particularly for the investor angle.
Also, extending deposits works too, often. So if they want to deposit, let's say 5% when you write the contract, 5% in 3 months, 5% in 12 months, often you can get away, in slower markets, maybe not currently, but you can get away with extending those to being like 5% today, 5% 12 months, 5% 18 months.
I think that's a great tip there. The other thing, in terms of price, a lot of developers are pretty sticky on their price, even in softer times. So I tend to find that if you're in a real slow market, yeah, you could probably negotiate the price. But in normal situations, you're more likely to get extras included as opposed to moving the price. So whether that's an extra storage or parking or some sort of upgrade in the finishing materials, they're more likely to throw an item in than reduce the price. So keep that in mind as well when it comes to negotiations.
Especially if they list properties on MLS. Often in slow markets, to get a little bit more exposure, they'll put half the units, a handful of units on MLS. And if those units are on MLS, they want them to sell for 100% of list price. The other thing to get a bit of a discount potentially is, rather than negotiating price, if something's priced at $9.99, rather than writing $9.50, write $9.99 and ask for a decorating allowance. It comes off on the statement of adjustments. It would be the exact same amount of money. Let's say you're asking for $25K decorating allowance, but the developer is able to post that they sold for $9.99. So that makes them happy, and they're a little more willing to move on a credit, let's call it, rather than taking it off price.
Yeah, they don't want future buyers to see that discount. Exactly. So they want to show the highest sale price possible. I'm going to add one more little red flag that really irritates me in these contracts, and this is kind of my, and there might be, I hope reputable developers don't do this, but this is my sketchy developer red flag. We talked about 5%, 10%, 15% deposit structures. Sometimes I've seen $1,000 extra deposit due a week or a month in advance of completion. So you put down your 5%, your 10%, your 15% deposit, and then there's this fourth payment or third payment for $1,000 a month before it completes. Why would that $1,000 exist in that contract a month before it completes? I can't think of a better idea other than the developer wants you to forget about that deposit and have an out to the contract. And, maybe there's, maybe like $1,000 is not a significant amount of money when we're talking about the dollar value that we're talking about. So and there's when you're making 3 deposit payments, when you're signing off amendment disclosures, and then they say the market has gained 20, 30%, and you don't have a reputable developer, and they have this extra $1,000 that's due 30 days before, and you didn't get it in on time. It's just opening yourself up to giving that developer a clear breach of contract that they can exit the deal from.
I know we've dealt with that in the past, but I haven't seen that in a long time.
I hope it goes away.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be there.
Talking about that specific example, as far as I know, developers are required to let you know in writing when a deposit is coming due. So did they do that? Because
I'm sure they would send a notice out that a deposit is due. I don't have an instance of someone. I don't have an example of someone breaching that $1,000 last payment. What just frustrates me is that it exists.
Yeah,
it's a small payment towards the completion date that gives if the buyer slips up, if they're on a vacation, if they don't, whatever it is, if something in your life happens and you're just not available for a period of time and you miss that deposit, it's stress you don't want to have. It's so I don't personally, I don't like those. And as a whole, I think that we need a little more consumer protection behind these new developments. There's just too much. Whenever if a buyer buys a place and it completes in 2 years and the value goes down significantly, they're on the hook. They lose their deposit and they're also on the hook for damages. And back in 2009, Ani Group had a big liquidation sale and discounted their units 20 to 30%. But they also so a lot of with the unsold units in the development, so a lot of buyers had unsold units or opportunities to get it at a discount. But what they also did was the people that were under contract that paid the previous price before the 20 to 35% discount, they made it real apparent that you can't just walk away from this deposit. We're going to go after damages as well, which is in the contract. So a developer can go after your deposit and damages if the market tanks and you're on the hook for it. And keep in mind, if the market tanks and the value of this property goes down, you may have lending issues. You may have genuine reasons why you can't complete. And if the developer takes your deposit and goes after damages because they resell it at a lower price and you're responsible for the difference in the price, that's a lot of money. But if the market goes up a lot, there's some instances here where they just refund your deposit. And there's overall, I think there's development contracts need a little more consumer protection and a little more equal balance between buyers and developers.
Totally.
Yeah.
I like it.
That was a good new construction rant. I hope you guys got some value out of this one. And don't shy away from new construction in this market.